Okay, so I guess I'll re-welcome you to week 8, Tuesday. And today we're discussing Girl, Woman, Other. And I have, I think, Emily, Andrew, and Justice on for discussion leadership today. So what we'll do is just allow 15 minutes and let me think about this for a second. So I think Justice, do you have the first section?
Yes.
Okay, super. So we'll just go in order. So it'll be Justice, and then I think Emily, and then Andrew. Okay, great. So I'm just going to let you take it from here, Justice. Let us know what we should be talking about or what you want us to do.
Sure. So I had the first section, which was about Emma, or Emma, however. So I started for this just to get the efferent reading, just so everyone's on the same page. So Emma is a playwright in her 50s who's debuting a new play. She is from London. So she starts by walking over to the venue and she reflects on her friend Dominique and how they created their theater company together and how they had lived together in an office block. When she arrives at the venue, she describes all her friends and she describes her experience with her mother's death and her father's death and how those events prompted her to conceive her own child. And she finishes by describing how she tried to instill in her own child Yaz many of her own political beliefs, but Yaz thinks differently than her about many things. So there's the efferent. Next would be the aesthetic reading. So for me, this first chapter seemed primarily concerned with setting up the subject matter of the book, both in detailing the backstories of the central characters, but also by providing a thematic through line between all the characters. So I believe the thematic element we're encountering here is alienation, or rather not fitting into society's perceptions of what you should be. And so this would, apply to Emma, and it would apply to her friend Dominique and all of her friends as well, like they're including a guy who wears dresses and just stuff like that, not really, I guess, fitting in. So my first discussion question that I had for everyone was, throughout the first chapter, Emma makes multiple allusions to hiding how she truly feels about something because it would go against her feminist ideology. So like, she doesn't want to admit that she likes women with big tits, or she doesn't want to admit that having her child, completed her. So she felt. So my question is this a contradiction with the feminist ideals?
I don't know. That's a really good question. I don't know that it's a contradiction. I think that there are lots of ways to be a feminist, and sometimes we, as a society, start looking at and just like Emma was talking about in here, that there's like a narrow path, and if you're not doing that, then you're not doing it right. But my personal philosophy for feminism is pretty simple. It's that women and people of non-binary genders or all genders should be treated with equality and equity, that we should have the same access to opportunities, and be able to make the choices that we want to make without disparagement because of our gender. So that might mean that for Emma's case, it might mean that she likes a particular kind of woman, or that becoming a mother is important to her. It might mean for some women that they want to focus on their career, or have a career and a family, or not work, stay home with their kids. And every one of those choices in my mind is valid. And and supports the ideals of feminism, as long as they have that access and the ability to make the choice. So I think just in general, we're judgmental of other people's choices and want to say, like, you know, you're doing X wrong because it doesn't fit into this box. And so even more general than the question of feminism or not. But yeah, I don't think that it contradicts feminism in my mind, but that there are people that would judge her for those choices.
Thanks, Heidi. Does someone else want to answer? So I can move on. We have chat. Let's see. She says, I haven't even started the book yet, but based on justice of info, I do think that is a contradiction in a way. If a man said that he preferred women with big tits, I think it would immediately be jumped on. Fair.
Yeah, there's a stereotype there, like that somehow that's what men prefer, and therefore if you're a feminist, you would somehow want to break that stereotype. I don't know, but we've lived in this culture and we've been indoctrinated in all the ideas that are around us and the images that are around us. And we may have individual preferences that are aligned with those stereotypes, for good or ill. And it might be more interesting to inquire into them rather than to just say, well, that's not kind of feminism. Yeah. And it's fun. I think this book is doing a lot with challenging our ideas about boundaries, you know.
Nice. So another question I had for everyone was, what made Amma change how she saw her father, and why did she change?
Justice, do you have that page marked where that happens? Or do you happen to?
I'm sure I could find it.
Because we could look, again, I think this is probably good for folks who are still getting into the book. Could look at it together.
It's on page 35 that she's talking about this.
Okay, Justice, ask your question again.
Okay, yeah. What made Amma change how she saw her father, and why? Megan says, I believe it was her own age and the realization of what she once had when he was gone. She realized she won't have a relationship with her father anymore. Yeah.
Yeah, and that idea that, yeah, right. Yeah, I like that. She can't heal it. Like, so she blamed her father for being a patriarch, and her mom always excused him as being part of a time period and place. And somehow she couldn't separate the beliefs from the man. I bet, again, I feel like that's another boundary issue. Like, can I like a person who thinks differently than I do and acts differently in the world than I do? And how do I, and maybe it takes some maturity and time to separate those things. But she instantly regrets not having built the relationship with him.
Well, Nancy, that's all I prepared for this.
Hey, thanks, Justice. I guess it's really fun for me to see you all do this work yourselves. And I want to admit that I'm reading this book with you for the first time. I sometimes teach books I've never read so that I can actually read them, so I can have time to read them. So I'm looking forward to being surprised as you are by things that happen. Great. Well, I'm continuing to look at that section on 35. There's some interesting details there. And maybe we could just work with that a little bit more before we move on to Emily. Right, so the mom died. Saying the mom died by a carnivorous disease. I'm assuming that's cancer. Not sure that's defined.
That's what I thought too.
Something that would eat you from the inside. Yeah. And then he died of heart failure not long after. Oh, right. Nice connection, Andrew, to Odor of Chrysanthemums, right? That regret at death. Like there's nothing you can do after someone dies. You have to live with whatever's left. Yeah. And that's a hard thing. Yeah. I think it's interesting that he died of heart failure, right? There's the literalness of it and the symbolicness of it. And he fled Ghana, right? He lost his home, his family, his friends, his culture, his language. And then Amma blames him for being patriarchal, without really maybe considering this whole backdrop of courageous action. Yeah, that her mom's disease was symbolic of her oppression, right? Because the mom lived with the patriarch, right? So you can think about that in one way, like an enabler, and maybe a betrayer of Amma herself. Amma may have felt that. But on the other hand, the mom, loved the guy and loved him enough to stick with him. Yeah. And if you are living a lifestyle influenced by your context, right? So I'm sure that I'm living a lifestyle influenced by my context as a white woman, over 50, able-bodied, right? There's limitations, college educated, advanced degrees, comfortable income. I have all kinds of limitations on my ability to perceive the world. And I hope that people take those into consideration when judging me, right? I'm trying to do my best, but I may not be able to do everything that someone with a different perspective can do. Yeah, good. Okay, there's one other detail that I thought was interesting, and then I'll give it over to Emily. Take a look on page 36 at the top. I'm just trying to figure this one out. He told her he loved her every year on her birthday when her mother was alive, when he signed the card she bought and sent for him. Is the she Amma? Like Amma sent a birthday card to him to sign and send back to her? Or is the she the mom? Maybe it's the mom, like, here, sign this and send it.
I think that's how I took it, that the mom bought a card, he wrote, "I love you" from dad, and the mom sent it. And I think it's interesting that she's saying that she regrets never telling her dad that she loved him. She probably, the way that she frames that, she probably was thinking it doesn't mean anything because he didn't put the effort in himself. He didn't send me the card. He didn't call me up and say, "I love you." But after he's gone, she's realizing that no matter the delivery, those words were important, and she's regretting that she didn't reciprocate.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I'm sure we have people in our lives like this, right? That we love or sort of love, and who we think love or sort of love us or don't maybe love us in the way that we want. And we have to deal with that. Yeah. Good. Okay, so that's Amma. Let's move on. Emily, if you want to do Yaz, let's hear a little bit about Yaz.
Yeah, so I wanted to make sure that I read my section, so I actually just skipped to that. And Emma was new to me today. Sorry if I'm a little echoey. I'm in Gilbert Hall. So, yeah, I took her to be like kind of an angsty teen, like definitely doesn't really like her mom, I think, and is like, we're so different, and they're in actuality not that different. So that's kind of what I gathered from her in terms of personality. And if you look at the very first sentence of the of the chapter, it says Yaz sits on the seat chosen by mum in the middle of the stalls. Um, so one of the best in the house, although she'd rather be hidden away at the back in case the play is another embarrassment. So that kind of set the tone for me, like right off the bat, as to what I was in for in terms of reading. But I think including the chosen by mum implies that like Yaz feels that there's a lot of power from the mother over her, when the mother feels like she's been very free with her daughter. Especially looking, I saw a page that said like, I always let Yaz dress how she wanted as long as it didn't hurt her health. And so I thought that that was kind of interesting to see like the mother-daughter relationship that is really showcased here. And then there's also a sentence on 43 that says, you mean you the way you felt not so long ago, mom? And so she is relating back to her mother's feelings, or like trying to relate to them, I thought. But I just kind of grasped there was a big divide. And then when I first read this, I didn't think that the dad was like actually a dad. I considered him to either be like a generalization of a dad, like maybe a community figure, or someone that like a large group called dad. But then, sorry, I have a hair in my mouth. I realized that it was her dad later on, and that she describes her dad as like, oh gosh, I have it written down here. Basically, she says on page 52, after when Yaz talks about her upbringing, when Yaz talks about her unusual upbringing to people, the unworldly ones expect her to be emotionally damaged from it. And then you skip ahead a little bit. How could you not be when your mom's a polyamorous lesbian and your father's a gay narcissist, as she describes him? And so again, there's that angst that's kind of shown of like, oh, my parents are like totally crazy, and like, check out how crazy they are. And so that's like a critique of her situation. And then her mom accuses her of like the looking for Obama syndrome. So before I continue, that was my first kind of question for the group. I just, my questions weren't as pensive as Justice's. Mine are much more like, what did you think about that? So when she said looking for Obama syndrome, I'm curious to see how anybody else interpreted that. Yeah, and so I'll pause there and we can have a little discussion.
I kind of took it as like he was our first Black president, so I kind of took it as they're looking for a way to gain power and be the first of their race to do something powerful like that.
Yes. Yeah. And mom accuses them of looking for Obama syndrome, and it's inclusive of her, of Yaz, and also her friends. And this is, I believe, before we see Walrus enter the picture.
Isn't that, this is in the context of her worrying that she's going to be alone, and her mom's accusing her of looking for Obama. I think it on the surface, what her mom is saying to her is, you're looking for the perfect man. We all know Obama's the perfect man. Look at the way he loves Michelle, and you know, politics, society. But I mean, and so I think she's telling her, you're looking for perfection, and if you talk to Michelle, maybe it doesn't exist in the way that we're seeing it. And so she's telling her, her friends are all saying, we're not prepared to settle. And her mom is saying, well, then maybe you're looking for something that doesn't exist, which is interesting because her mom is a feminist and has had lots and lots of relationships and is in a poly relationship and has, I wouldn't say that she has settled, but she's certainly
Comfortable.
I mean, yeah, and I can't. It's she's telling her daughter one thing and living in another way. I think because you know she certainly hasn't like decided, oh, this is good enough for me. I mean, she's moved around a lot.
Yeah. Awesome. Does anybody else have anything to add before I go on here?
I was thinking of Yaz as she seems like an interesting balance. Like she seems very confident in her Blackness. Like I'm thinking about that, you know, the fact that not only does she have this afro and that she's thinking about as wild, energetic, strong, and voluminous, really like claiming the power of this hair, but she's also willing to tie it back when it's needed. So she's kind of like a really interesting balance. I don't know, like I want to say celebratory of race and maybe not like limited by ongoing interrogation of oppression. She's just going to go for it and not worry too much about it.
Yeah.
And maybe that connects with her, you know, single status as well. She's wanting something relatively traditional, and yet she's, you know, and she's a little worried about not getting what she wants. But, you know, she doesn't let that stop her. She just goes on and does her thing.
Yeah.
I wondered, that part stuck out to me too, where she was like, you know, who would want to sit behind something that you can't see around? But I also wonder if part of that might be her youth and she hasn't experienced as many microaggressions. And I'm certain she's experienced a lot, but I think that there just comes a point where it's just one more thing that feels like too much. And so someone sitting behind you says, I can't see over your hair, might not seem like a big deal, but it comes after lots and lots of comments. And we're just talking about hair, people touching your hair, people saying these are the appropriate hairstyles in the workplace, and they're all more Eurocentric. And so I think that it might also be that she's still, sorry to you younger people, has some of that that idealization of youth. So it would be interesting to see how she feels 20 years from then.
Yeah, and thank you, Cassandra, for your comments. So she basically said that the non-traditional elements that she was brought up with have made her crave that traditional life and kind of the everything that you know see with the white picket fence and the, you know, husband and wife and their two perfect children, boy and a girl, yada yada yada. So yeah, and strong open mind or strong opinionated, very much. Yes, I agree with that, Megan. So yeah, which is why I found her friendship with Loris so interesting. On page 55, sorry, how much time do I have? I kind of am just going.
You have another 5 minutes.
Okay. So I thought her friendship with Boris was interesting because on page 55, it says, Boris says yes to the hijab and sex outside marriage, no to booze and pork. And so I just kind of loved that sentence because like I love that her friend embraces the religion and the fact where she like represents it physically, but then like contradicts it with her actions to a degree. Like she definitely takes it and makes it her own, which is what I feel like Yaz also does with all of the situations that are kind of thrown at her. And so I just thought that was really interesting. And then how protective Yaz was of her, even though they were from different cultures and held different kind of outlooks on everything. She still defended her friend whenever there was like questioning of why she was wearing a hijab, which is why I also thought that was kind of interesting where she would pull back her afro if somebody asked her to, but then when somebody asked her friend about religion, she instantly jumps and is like, you don't have the right to ask that. And so I thought that relationship was interesting, just how she was defensive for other people, but when it came to herself, she was also able to kind of take a step back and have like that cultural innocence that Heidi was mentioning. So yeah, that's basically what I said. And then my last little discussion thing was just how did the introduction of wars create a shift in the text for Yaz and her character? But I kind of already touched on that because I had 5 minutes left. So I will wrap that up and then give it back to Nancy.
Thanks, Emily. Yeah, I guess Mike, as your teacher, looking at, I don't know, I'm making assumptions since I don't know all of you personally and I can't see all of you. Some of us are older and some of us are younger. Some of us are not traditional college age and some of us are. And I'm just wondering from the folks that are traditional college age, do you feel your experience resonates with the Yaz's experience, sort of trying to take and leave these parts of the home culture, rebelling against some things? Yeah. I know when I left home at 17, I went 3,000 miles away. I had a relatively good childhood, but I was ready to get out and not be under the shadow of my family. And that took, you know, for good and ill, I guess. Yeah. Yeah. Maybe we all go through that phase. I'm raising a teenager, you probably know, my daughter's 17, and I always think, okay, teenagers are biologically hardwired to rebel. It's their job because that's what's going to support them in leaving the nest. But it's sometimes hard. Yeah. Yeah. Kept moving out and coming back. Oh, Megan, never had a rebellious phase. Great. Or maybe it's all rebellion. After a couple years of college, I moved back in with my parents for a year, and that was really fun too. Ongoing rebellion. Yeah, it was fun to be a roommate of my parents. Changed everything. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Oh, great. Yeah, you got to keep those parents in line, Justice. Yeah, it's the job of the kids. Good. Yeah, and I think, don't you feel like even when you love your family, you do need to get out and establish your own identity. Oh yeah, and when you have a child that age too, you're watching it from the outside or in reverse of your own experience. Yeah, I think we just need it, and it's necessary and fun to get out and experience stuff. Okay, so we're gonna do one more discussion, and that's the Dominique section. And I guess, again, I feel like a theme that's arising for me with, right, yeah, I think we get ready to launch into the world at some point. Yeah, or I don't know, and maybe we become our parents eventually. Like we launch and we think, we think we establish ourselves as independent individuals, and then we find out that we're actually a lot more similar to our parents than we expected. Scary thought. Yeah, good. All right, so Dominique, obviously, as Justice said in his discussion, is Amma's friend and had been a professional colleague of hers in running the theater company that they ran together. And I think one thing that, again, interests me, like maybe a theme that I'm picking up on as I'm reading, is this like intentional blurring of some of the like kind of strict boundaries that we expect culturally. And so I was really interested in Dominique's partner, Nzinga, and the relationship that happens there, where, you know, and thinking too about Amma being constantly having partners and leaving them, right? So this sort of constant need to seek somebody new. And Dominique realizing that maybe she's found the person, right? Which is, again, a traditional belief that you would find the one who's your forever person. Like all of our romance fiction tells us that person is out there. So she thinks she's found it. And then, of course, she follows Nzinga to America, and they live in the middle of nowhere, right? So rural America, building homes and living in a woman's community. And yet, and Nzinga seems to value these things, yet when they get there, she sequesters Dominique and really forces her to be separate from the community in which they're living, the friends that Dominique has left, and really making any choices at all. So I guess I was wondering what you thought about that relationship.
I think it's scary how quickly even a strong person can lose themselves in an abusive relationship and they don't even see the signs, and suddenly you go from that's a little weird, but I can live with it, to here by the end of the relationship, she had no ability to make any choices, not what she ate, not what she wore, not how she wore her hair, and all of her life was just waiting to respond to Nzinga. I found it particularly telling when she got out, and the first night they asked her what she wanted for dinner and she couldn't decide. They ended up making everything because she hadn't made even that simple of a decision in so long. But before this point, we see her as this vibrant, strong, opinionated woman. So yeah, the damage that a relationship can do like that can do is deep and lasting, and I think it's just really interesting, that transformation.
Yeah, and that I guess that we're seeing it in a woman-woman relationship. We often see that in a man-woman relationship, where the man is often, sometimes the woman does that kind of emotional damage, right, of controlling everything in the man's life.
I don't think we're used to the idea of women being abusers. I know I have a brother who left his first wife because she was abusive to him, and that people didn't believe him, that like she was physically and emotionally abusive, but it happens. We just think of that as a more masculine trait.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Emily, can you expand a little bit on that abuse Nzinga experience?
Yeah, so that's on page, let's see, that's on page 77. And so it starts about, well, at the top of the page, but the main chunk of it is definitely towards the end. And it talks about how Nzinga was raped and while she was stayed in to do her homework. And then it also talks about just kind of the person that she was, and kind of paints a picture of like her father was a drunk, and her mother was a factory worker who was like abused by the husband. And so it definitely kind of gives you an eye into what was going on in Nzinga's life before, and kind of provides some context for perhaps why. It's never an excuse, but it definitely, if you're kind of programmed to think that way and to, I don't know, I always believe like it's a combination of nature and nurture. And so I think that it just was the bad combination of each one. So yeah,
Cassandra said abuse is often a cycle, right? So the stuff that you endure as a child, sometimes you end up dishing out as an adult. Yeah. Or sometimes it's workplace, you know, you're experiencing oppression in the workplace, and then you go home to your domestic environment and dish it out to your family. Some of those unfortunate kinds of cyclic actions. It's hard to break out of that.
And I think also in this case, it's shown where she was powerless for so long, likely in her childhood, that as soon as she became an adult, that power that she was able to have over Dominique, she just kind of took advantage of.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. And to the extent that Dominique needed an intervention to make a change, she couldn't actually make it herself, which seems also common to stories of abuse, where the survivor is trapped, and you look at it from the outside and you wonder, why didn't she just leave? And you know, yeah, there's a pretty clear depiction of why she didn't leave. The slow erosion of choice. Yeah, it's hard. That's hard, definitely. Yeah.
I found it interesting that she got that, like you mentioned, that they came and kind of saved her or whatever, but Amma came, I don't know, 2 years before them,
Mhm.
and she turned her down to leave then. So it kind of took like another 2 years of this before she finally like realized what was happening and agreed with the intervention.
And she got to the point where she couldn't live that anymore. Yeah, but it's almost like she needed a lever to push her out. Heidi also wrote in the chat, right, that Nzinga shares her story of abuse on their first meeting, right? So not that that's her fault, nor not that she's lying, but it's interesting that that would be her self-introduction, like that formative story. Yeah. Yeah. And maybe she needs to believe, you know, maybe she needs, that's a touchstone for her in understanding what her own needs are. It may also be a way of manipulation, like Heidi's saying, manipulating others. One thing that interests me, again, I think in just human life and maybe also in literature, is the idea, yeah, counseling, yeah, for sure. All of us probably could benefit. But this idea that somehow like our identities are fluid, and a lot of the time we're performing an identity that we want others to see. And I'm thinking about the ways in which that Nzinga might need to do that as a result of her own history. Yeah, and I like that, yeah, as a way of establishing trust and empathy, right? That she's taking a risk and revealing this vulnerable part of her past, and risks are the way you build trust, right? Because if you can get through it, then you're in a situation where likely you can trust the people that you're taking risks with. As a teacher, I often think about students taking risks in the classroom. Like all of you are taking a risk in doing discussion leadership, and hopefully that builds a better community and sense of trust. Yeah. Yeah, and I wonder too, yeah, that manipulation, her relational behavior later is all about manipulation. Yeah, yeah. And she feels to me kind of like a narcissist, you know, in the sense that she has to project her reality onto the world, regardless of what the world is actually doing. And that inability to accept any guilt for the negative things that happen. Good. Okay. Well, let me ask you, and again, those of you that are just getting started can probably answer this as well. This text is interesting in terms of the way it's written. And how is that functioning for you so far? It's just a different format. I'm even thinking about the beginning of the Yaz section. Lost it. You know, I think it says like her name is the first line and then it skips down. Yeah, it says, that's not helpful. The first line is the word Yaz, the name Yaz, and the second jumps in with the verb, right? Sits on the seat chosen. Yeah. Confusing. and the I changing in each chapter, it's helpful that the writer is giving the name of the character at the beginning of each chapter. And then within the first person, she's also using the third person. So telling the backstory, telling some of the stories about the other characters. Yeah, it could be gimmicky, right? That it's just a way of calling attention to itself. Oh, audiobook. Yeah, I do a lot of listening to audiobooks, and you wouldn't catch the visual in the audiobook, obviously. Yeah. Yeah. Oh. Yeah, that's frustrating. The rotation on a Kindle could make a mess out of all of this. Yeah, I think, well, let me maybe give you a frame for thinking about linguistic variation in literary areas. So if we imagine that people of color are operating in their native language, in this case, English, the native language in which they were educated and grew up. But that language is also has a history of colonizing the various ethnic groups that, from which their heritage is drawn. There may be, I want to say, a love-hate relationship with the language, right? So English as the dominator language may be something that the writer wants to kind of rebel against. And interestingly, visually, this writer is, you know, it's not hard to read necessarily once you get used to it. In fact, it creates a lot of white space that sometimes writers like Charles Dickens or Dostoevsky with big long paragraphs don't do for the reader. But by fragmenting the language, she may be making also a political statement in this artistic environment. Feels like a conversation. Yeah, I agree. Almost like girlfriends talking to girlfriends, right? And the way in which it kind of moves from little chunk to little chunk of information. When I'm in a conversation, like it doesn't move logically from the beginning to the end often. Like I was talking with my sister on the phone the other day and she's like, I can't remember why I'm telling you this. And I was like, it had to do with a couple topics ago, right? You have to go back and retrace the logic if you want. You don't have to. But almost like casual, there's a word for it, where it's not a logical set of connections. It's associative, right? So one thing leads to another thing, leads to another thing. Yeah, or a novel in verse. Yeah, or like a lyric essay that's somehow halfway between poetry and prose. When I read it, though, it doesn't feel like poetry to me. It does feel like narrative. But visually, it's doing something else. Yeah, and so there may be just worth watching some of that, seeing what the effect is. Yeah, good. All right. Anybody want to have the last word? Okay, so for next time, we have, let's see, Landry and Alexa, you're on for discussion leadership. Yeah, this is where I'm picturing you nodding and smiling.
Yep.
Yes.
Great. Well, we'll look forward to it. Well,
Can I say something really quick?
please.
I read a little bit ahead this morning, or I listened a little bit ahead, and in Carol's section, just as a content warning, there is rape on the page. So just if anyone is sensitive to that, just wanted to put that out there.
Thank you. Good. Anything else? Okay, then I look forward to more discussion. I will get back to you regarding your articles. If you need help locating articles, let me know. I'm happy to work with you to find them. Okay, have a great day.
Thank you, you too.
Bye.
Bye.